October 7th, 1571, in the shimmering waters of the Gulf of Patras, off the coast of western Greece, two of the largest fleets ever assembled were about to collide. On one side, the seemingly unstoppable sea power of the Ottoman Empire, which had spent decades terrifying Europe and dominating the Mediterranean. On the other, a fragile, bickering alliance of Christian states, held together by a thread of shared faith and existential fear. On paper, the two forces looked like a near-perfect match, with a combined force of over 450 warships and nearly 100,000 men. A bloody, drawn-out stalemate seemed not just possible, but inevitable. And yet, in just a few hours, the Ottoman fleet was annihilated in one of the most lopsided victories in naval history. This wasn't a miracle. It was the result of a single, revolutionary tactical concept the Ottomans simply never saw coming. It was a strategy born from desperation, innovation, and the daring of a few leaders who refused to play by the old rules of war. This is the story of how one brilliant, multi-layered tactic, deployed at the perfect moment, shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility and changed the course of naval warfare forever. To really get the shock of what happened at Lepanto, you have to understand the world of 1571. For the better part of a century, the Ottoman Empire wasn't just a nation, it was a force of nature. Ever since Constantinople fell in 1453, its shadow had stretched relentlessly west. Under sultans like Mehmed the Conqueror and Suleiman the Magnificent, Ottoman armies marched deep into Europe, besieging Vienna itself, while their fleets turned the Mediterranean into what many feared would become an Ottoman lake. Their power felt limitless, their victory preordained. Suleiman's son, Selim II, inherited this legacy of conquest. He might not have had his father's reputation on the battlefield, but he had the same imperial ambition. He wanted Cyprus, a rich, strategic jewel of the Venetian Republic that stood as a Christian outpost in the eastern Mediterranean. In 1570, a massive Ottoman force landed on the island, brushed aside resistance, and laid siege to its cities. The world watched in horror, but nobody was surprised. This was just how things worked. The Ottomans advanced, and Christendom fell back. Nicosia fell, its people subjected to a brutal sacking. Soon, only the port of Famagusta remained, commanded by a Venetian governor, Marcantonio Bragadin. For almost a year, his garrison held out against impossible odds in a heroic defense that captured Europe's imagination. But it couldn't last. In August 1571, with his men starving, Bragadin negotiated a surrender. The Ottoman commander, Lala Mustafa Pasha, offered honorable terms, safe passage to Venetian-held Crete. It was a lie. As soon as the gates were open and the garrison disarmed, the agreement was broken. The Ottoman forces unleashed a wave of slaughter. Marcantonio Bragadin was subjected to a horrific, drawn-out public execution. He was mutilated, and his skin was flayed from his body, stuffed with straw, and paraded as a grotesque trophy before being sent to the Sultan. The fall of Famagusta and the martyrdom of Bragadin wasn't just a military defeat. It was a visceral atrocity that sent a shockwave of terror and outrage across Europe. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. For the divided states of Christian Europe, this was no longer about defending some distant island. This was about their own survival. They had no choice. They had to fight. The architect of the Christian response was a man with no armies and no fleet, Pope Pius V, a stern and unyielding figure. Pius V had spent years trying to wake Europe up to the Ottoman threat, pleading for a new crusade. But the rivalries ran deep. The Republic of Venice saw Spain as its main rival. The Spanish Empire, under the cautious King Philip II, was the biggest military power in Europe, but its attention was split. Philip was dealing with a revolt in the Netherlands, Barbary pirates on his coasts, and an always empty treasury. He wasn't eager to commit his powerful navy, the only one that could truly match the Ottomans, to a war that seemed to mostly benefit Venice. Meanwhile, other states like Genoa were Venice's competitors and Spain's allies, while France was actually in an anti-Spanish alliance with the Ottomans. Putting together an alliance from this squabbling mess seemed like a fool's errand. Fights broke out between Spanish and Italian soldiers in port. The admirals argued endlessly over who should pay for what and who was in charge. It was a diplomatic nightmare, but the sheer horror of Famagusta finally broke the deadlock. Pius V's tireless diplomacy, fueled by righteous fury, finally worked. On May 25, 1571, the Holy League was formally declared, an alliance between Spain, the Papal States, Venice, and several smaller Italian powers. It was a monumental achievement, however fragile. Now, this unwieldy coalition needed a commander. The man chosen was Don Juan de Austria, the illegitimate half-brother of King Philip II of Spain. At just 24 years old, Don Juan was a figure plucked from a storybook. He was handsome, charismatic, and burned with a desire for glory. He wasn't a seasoned admiral, but he was a born leader. His royal blood gave him the authority to command the League's fractious admirals, and his youthful energy was key to forging this collection of competing fleets into a single fighting force. He was assisted by a council of old sea dogs. There was the 75-year-old Venetian, Sebastiano Venier, a famously aggressive and hot-tempered warrior. There was the cool-headed papal admiral, Marcantonio Colonna, who acted as a crucial mediator. And there was the Genoese admiral Gianandrea Doria, a cunning and cautious tactician. The tension between these men, especially between the Venetian Venier and the Genoese Doria, was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Throughout the summer of 1571, the fleets gathered at Messina, in Sicily. The Holy League had assembled a force of 208 vessels, including 6 strange new superweapons. Venice provided the most ships, while Spain provided the core of the elite infantry, the famed tercios. Before sailing, in a brilliant move to secure the loyalty of the men who powered the warships, Don Juan ordered the galley slaves unchained and armed, promising them freedom if they fought. Finally, on September 16th, this great Christian armada sailed east to meet its destiny. Awaiting them at Lepanto was the Ottoman fleet. Numbering around 300 ships, it was larger than the Christian fleet and crewed by men who believed they were invincible. They were the masters of the Mediterranean, fresh off their victory at Cyprus, and they were confident. Their commander was Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha. Unlike many Ottoman admirals, Ali Pasha wasn't a hardened corsair. He was a court favorite, known more for his loyalty to the Sultan than for his naval experience. He was a good administrator, but he lacked a true feel for the sea. And his greatest fear wasn't the enemy. It was the Sultan's wrath if he failed to follow his order: find the Christians and destroy them. This put him at odds with his most formidable subordinate, Uluç Ali Pasha. Uluç Ali was everything Ali Pasha was not: a European convert to Islam. He had risen through the ranks as an Algerian corsair, a brilliant and ruthless tactician who knew every dirty trick the Mediterranean had to offer. He was arguably the most skilled admiral in the world. As the Christian fleet approached, Uluç Ali, the pragmatist, argued for caution. He wanted to draw the Christians into the open sea, where his faster galleys could outflank them. He also pointed out that many of his best soldiers and archers weren't even there. But Ali Pasha was trapped. He had a direct command from the Sultan to engage. To refuse battle could be seen as cowardice, a death sentence. Fueled by overconfidence and a fatal underestimation of the Christian fleet's firepower, Ali Pasha dismissed Uluç Ali's concerns. He would obey his sultan. He would fight. It was a decision driven by pride and politics, and it was the first in a chain of catastrophic errors. As dawn broke on October 7th, 1571, the two colossal fleets came into view. For a tense moment, the wind favored the Ottomans, pushing them toward the Christian line. A profound silence fell across the Christian ships, broken only by the creak of oars. Then a new sound rose. On every ship, priests held up crucifixes and led the men in prayer. Don Juan raised the holy standard of the League, a blue banner showing the crucifixion, on his flagship, the Real. He then jumped into a small, fast boat and weaved through his fleet. He didn't shout battle plans. He spoke to his men directly, his voice carrying across the water, reminding them of their homes, their faith, and their honor. "You have come here to fight the holy battle, to win or to die," he told them. "But whether you die or win, you will earn the glory of immortality." It was a masterstroke of leadership. He turned a collection of rival squadrons into a single Christian army. Then, as if in answer to their prayers, the wind shifted. The breeze that had favored the Ottomans died, and a new wind blew from the west, now at the backs of the heavier Christian fleet, hindering the Ottoman advance. Across the water, the Ottoman fleet was a riot of sound and color, pipes, drums, and cymbals clashing in a cacophony designed to intimidate. From his flagship, the Sultana, Ali Pasha fired a single blank shot, the formal challenge to battle. From the Real, Don Juan returned the salute. The time for maneuvering was over. The battle was about to begin. As the fleets closed in, the Ottoman commanders would have seen a familiar formation, a long center line with two flanking squadrons, standard stuff. But then they would have noticed something strange, something new. Positioned about a half-mile ahead of the main Christian line were 6 enormous, hulking vessels. They were slow, almost clumsy-looking, and had to be towed into position. These were the Venetian galleasses, the Holy League's secret weapon. The galleass was a revolutionary concept, a floating fortress. Venice was facing a manpower shortage and couldn't compete with the Ottoman Empire's vast armies, so they turned to technology. They repurposed large merchant galleys, reinforcing their hulls and packing them with an unheard-of amount of artillery. A normal galley might have 5 cannons, all facing forward. A galleass bristled with over 40 cannons, pointing from all directions, including the broadsides, a concept that would define the future age of sail. They were too high to be easily boarded, and their firepower was immensely greater than anything else on the water. Don Juan's plan was audacious. These 6 galleasses, 2 in front of each main division, would act as a disruptive vanguard. Their job was to break the Ottoman charge before it ever reached the main Christian line. The Ottoman commanders, unfamiliar with these strange ships, disastrously underestimated them. They saw them as slow targets and ordered their lines to just row past them. This was exactly what the Christians had hoped for. Around 10:20 a.m., the galleasses opened fire. The effect was devastating. Cannonballs tore into the tightly packed Ottoman formation. As the Ottoman galleys surged past, the galleasses unleashed their broadsides. Massive iron balls smashed through hulls, shattered oars, and scythed through the ranks of soldiers on deck. The opening salvos sank several Ottoman galleys before they even fired a shot. The perfect Ottoman crescent formation began to fall apart as ships swerved to avoid the wrecks and the relentless cannonade. The psychological impact was just as severe as the physical damage. The Ottoman charge, meant to be a swift, overwhelming assault, was blunted and disorganized before the main battle was even joined. The galleasses had done their job perfectly. With the Ottoman formation in disarray, the battle proper began on the Christian left wing. This was the post of greatest danger. Here, 53 Venetian galleys under the veteran Admiral Agostino Barbarigo faced the Ottoman right wing, a force of 57 galleys under Mehmed Sirocco. Sirocco's plan was classic: use his superior numbers to sweep around the Christian flank and pin them against the shore. It was a sound plan that should have worked, but Barbarigo was no ordinary commander. As Sirocco's galleys surged forward, Barbarigo did something extraordinary. He ordered his entire squadron to execute a massive, coordinated counterclockwise pivot. It's hard to overstate how difficult this was. Dozens of ships turning in unison in the heat of battle. It's been described as a near impossibility. Yet, they pulled it off. The Venetian squadron swung like a giant hinged gate. This single, brilliant maneuver completely reversed the situation. Instead of being outflanked, Barbarigo had now pinned Mehmed Sirocco's squadron against the very shore they had tried to use as a trap. The battle on the northern flank devolved into a brutal, close-quarters slugfest. The fighting was savage. Barbarigo, leading from the front, directed the battle from his flagship's bow. He knew Ottoman archers targeted commanders, so he fought with his visor down. But in the chaos, needing to shout an order, he lifted it for just a moment. It was long enough. An Ottoman arrow struck him in the eye, mortally wounding him. But his sacrifice wasn't in vain. His brilliant pivot had secured the Christian left flank and doomed the Ottoman right. His subordinate took command and pressed the advantage. The trapped Ottoman ships were systematically destroyed. Mehmed Sirocco was captured and executed. The victory on the northern flank was total, made possible by a maneuver of breathtaking skill. While Barbarigo's men were fighting for their lives in the north, the main event was unfolding in the center. Here, 62 Holy League galleys under Don Juan himself faced the heart of the Ottoman fleet, commanded by Ali Pasha from his flagship, the Sultana. This was the decisive clash. Driven by his fatalistic orders, Ali Pasha steered the Sultana directly into Don Juan's reel. The ships rammed head-on, their prows locking them together into a single, floating battlefield. The battle for the center instantly became an infantry fight. Elite Ottoman janissaries swarmed onto the reel's deck, their initial charge pushing the Spanish soldiers back. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the Christian flagship might be overwhelmed. But now, another Christian advantage came into play: firepower. The Ottomans relied on archers, whose bows had a high rate of fire. The Christians, however, had equipped their soldiers with the arquebus, an early firearm. Though slower to load, the arquebus fired a lead ball that could punch right through the light armor and shields of the janissaries. The Spanish tercios formed disciplined ranks and unleashed devastating volleys. Seeing Don Juan in trouble, Marcantonio Colonna maneuvered his own ship alongside the Sultana, boarding it from the other side. Soon, other Christian galleys surrounded the two locked flagships in a swirling, chaotic melee. Don Juan, brilliant in his armor, led a counterattack that drove the janissaries back. The tide turned decisively when Spanish reinforcements boarded the Sultana. In the brutal fighting, Ali Pasha was struck by an arquebus ball. A Spanish soldier, ignoring orders to take the admiral alive, beheaded him. The head was impaled on a pike and hoisted for all to see. The effect on Ottoman morale was catastrophic. Seeing their commander's head on an enemy ship, the heart went out of the Turkish forces in the center. The Ottoman center, which had fought so fiercely moments before, began to collapse. While victory was being secured on the left and in the center, a crisis was developing on the Christian right. Here, 53 galleys were commanded by the Genoese admiral, Gianandrea Doria. His opponent was the most dangerous man in the Ottoman fleet, Ulus Ali. Doria was a cautious commander, maybe too cautious. He knew Ulus Ali's reputation and was terrified of being outflanked. Ulus Ali saw this and brilliantly exploited it. Instead of a frontal assault, he began moving his squadrons south into the open sea, feinting a wide sweep around the entire Christian formation. Doria fell for it. He pulled his squadron south to counter the threat, and in doing so, he opened up a huge, dangerous gap between his own squadron and Don Juan's embattled center. This was the exact opportunity the wily corsair had been waiting for. With the gap wide open, Ulus Ali abandoned his feint and ordered his ships to turn sharply, making straight for the exposed Christian center. His fresh galleys slammed into the side of the line, targeting the small, elite squadron of the Knights of Malta. The Knights fought with legendary courage, but were horribly outmatched. The Christian center, which had just won a decisive victory, was suddenly about to be rolled up from the flank. Ulus Ali was on the verge of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. This was the moment the final crucial piece of the Holy League's plan came into play. A powerful, dedicated reserve force, something the Ottomans had neglected. Held back behind the main line was a squadron of 38 galleys under Don Alvaro de Bazan, the Marquis of Santa Cruz. Bazan was arguably the most experienced naval commander in the entire Christian fleet, a veteran of unshakable calm. His reserve was a potent striking force, held back for the most critical moment. That moment was now. Watching the battle unfold, Bazan saw the disaster looming. As Ulus Ali's corsairs overwhelmed the Knights of Malta, Bazan acted without hesitation. He split his force. He sent one part charging to rescue the Christian center, plugging the gap with fresh galleys and fresh soldiers. Simultaneously, Bazan led the rest of his reserve to aid Doria's now scattered squadron. This decisive intervention completely thwarted Ulus Ali's brilliant maneuver. Faced with Bazan's powerful reserve and seeing the battle was already lost elsewhere, the cunning corsair knew the day was done. Gathering what ships he could, between 30 and 40, Ulus Ali executed a masterful fighting withdrawal, escaping to report the catastrophe to the Sultan. The strategic use of the reserve was the final nail in the Ottoman coffin. While the galleasses broke the charge and Barbarigo's pivot crushed the right, it was Bazan's reserve that provided the flexibility to counter the enemy's most dangerous moves and seal the victory. It was the keystone in the arch of the Christian victory. By 4 in the afternoon, the guns fell silent. The smoke cleared to reveal a scene of unimaginable devastation. The Gulf of Patras was a floating graveyard, thick with wreckage, splintered oars, and bodies. The scale of the Ottoman defeat was total. Of their massive fleet, only the handful of galleys that escaped with Ulus Ali survived. Over 200 warships were either sunk, burned, or captured. As many as 15,000 Ottoman soldiers and sailors were killed. While the Holy League's losses were far lighter, only 12 galleys sunk, the victory still came at a steep price, with around 8,000 men killed or wounded. But the most emotional moment came as Christian boarding parties moved through the captured ships. Chained to the rowing benches below decks were an estimated 12,000 Christian galley slaves. As their shackles were broken and they were brought into the daylight, some for the first time in years, they were no longer slaves, but free men. Their liberation was perhaps the most human symbol of the victory. And among the wounded on the Christian side was a young Spanish soldier named Miguel de Cervantes, who survived to later write Don Quixote. The news of the victory spread across Europe like wildfire, met with jubilant celebration and relief. For the first time in generations, the spell of Ottoman invincibility had been broken. In the aftermath, Lepanto was hailed as a miracle that had saved Christendom. The psychological impact was immense. It proved the Turks could be decisively beaten. However, the long-term strategic results were more complicated. The Holy League quickly fell apart, its old rivalries resurfacing. Venice, exhausted and eager to resume its lucrative trade with the East, signed a separate peace treaty in 1573, shamefully surrendering Cyprus to the Ottomans, the very island the war was fought over. The Ottoman Grand Vizier famously mocked a Christian envoy, saying, "In defeating our fleet, you have merely shaved our beard. A shaved beard grows back stronger, but in conquering Cyprus, we have cut off your arm. An arm once severed does not grow back." He wasn't entirely wrong. The Ottomans rebuilt their fleet with astonishing speed. Within 6 months, a new navy of over 200 ships was constructed. But this misses a crucial point. The Ottomans could rebuild ships, but they couldn't replace the men inside them. They had lost tens of thousands of their most experienced sailors, Marines, and, most importantly, their elite archers. These were skills honed over a lifetime, and their loss was a devastating blow to the quality of the Ottoman navy for a generation. Lepanto effectively halted major Ottoman expansion in the Western Mediterranean, marking a new equilibrium of power. The Battle of Lepanto wasn't a miracle. It was a triumph of strategy, technology, and leadership, won by a brilliantly conceived, multi-layered tactic. It began with the technological shock of the galleasses, which shattered the enemy's charge. It continued with the tactical genius of Agostino Barbarigo's impossible pivot, which crushed the Ottoman right. It was sustained by superior infantry firepower in the chaotic center. And finally, it was all secured by the decisive deployment of Alvaro de Bazan's reserve, which rescued the fleet from the brink of disaster. This combination of disruptive technology, disciplined maneuver, superior firepower, and strategic depth, all orchestrated by the leadership of Don Juan, is what shattered the Ottoman fleet. Lepanto is a powerful reminder that even against seemingly impossible odds, a better plan can change the course of history. If you enjoyed this look at one of history's greatest naval battles, be sure to like and subscribe for more breakdowns of the strategies that shaped our world. Let us know in the comments, what other decisive battle should we cover next? And while you wait, check out our episode on the Great Siege of Malta, another epic clash between these two Mediterranean titans. Thanks for watching.